Welcome back. So today we are going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to talk about a dongle, but not in the way we usually talk about dongles. This is the EPZ TP35 Pro, which is essentially the same as the original TP35, but it's got two distinct differences. One, they are supporting microphone on 3.5 millimeter, and that's kind of interesting on its own. But two, they added walk play support for EQ support for onboard DAC EQing, and that is essentially what we are going to cover here. But if you go to AliExpress, I'll put the link. Kind of ignore the price. That is the US tariff price. Yours might be a little bit lower, but that is my price as it is shown today. So kind of what I talked about even with Tangent's Stargate. WalkPlay has both a app for your phone, an Android app, but it also has Chrome browser support, so web browser support. And this is the web browser interface. You get to it by peq.scwalkplay.com, and I'll put a link to it there as well. But the first thing you want to do is essentially this. So this is my PC. You plug in your dongle, start playing music, so you hear music going through it. And then you can kind of push this off to the side. This is what it looks like in foobar. You would essentially set your output to TP35 Pro and off you go. So we'll move that off to the side. In the WalkPlay interface, you'll just basically connect to it and you'll see TP35. And then it will magically read the settings that I already have set up on my TP35. But right here, so TP35, TP35 Pro, EPZ, all of that stuff. You do get some additional things. As I said, they do have mic support, so you will have a configuration of the mic. You also do have DAC filter support, so you can do non-oversampling, which is kind of an interesting one. Access on a Cirrus chip to actually pick that filter, which is actually pretty cool. Class AB or Class H, for those of you familiar with Class A, you know that is not all that power efficient for your phone. So AB was the more power efficient version of Class A. Class H is essentially the more power efficient version of Class AB. So that's, if you want to save your battery on your phone, you can run in Class H. Otherwise, AB is probably fine. Game modes, low and high, balance, all that. So all of this is kind of somewhat interesting, and it's nice to have an interface to it as well. But what we're kind of more interested in is this little bit. So this is the EQ interface to the TP35 Pro. And I call this one UnHarman, which you can kind of see here. So as you get TP35 Pro out of the box, it is quite flat, quite neutral. It sounds very much like any other Cirrus, 43198 chip. They all sound pretty similar to me, and they all sound a bit Harman to me. So why I was very interested in this particular model was, one, it was going to be flat, so I didn't have to overcompensate for any coloring that EPZ may have did. They gave you essentially a blank canvas that is nice and flat that you can actually modify for a sound that is more along the lines of your preferences. And that's exactly what I did here. So for those of you who watched my after shows, you'll kind of recognize some of these settings. So I tend to move some of the energy from the sub bass right into the mid bass, and that's essentially what you see here. So -2 on the sub bass, -1 on the sub bass, and then move 1 and 1 into the mid bass. So that actually does this. So this kind of tilts down the sub bass and then gives you that mid bass bump, and that is going to be your lower mid body. That is going to be a little bit more warm. That is going to give you a slightly more impact on your mid bass, and that is why I do that. This sub bass move is something that U-shaped sets do, that Harman sets do, and that's kind of fine. It gives you very clean mids, but it doesn't give you natural sounding mids. So that's what this move essentially does. Move some of the energy that would be out there that isn't all that great on budget sets. They don't do sub bass out here all that well, so they tend to bump it out too much because it sounds fun. But in reality, a more natural, fuller sounding mid is when you add a little bit more energy into the lower mids, into the mid bass. And then as you get into the upper mids, kind of where Harman isn't all that great at because it's over energetic, you kind of tilt those down as well. So -1, you can actually leave 3000. I like the ear gain right at about 3000, and then tilt down 5000 because I'm sensitive to 5000. So lower the sub bass, move some of the energy from the sub bass into the mid bass, and then lower the upper mids because that is sort of the glaring point on Harman sets as well. And then out here, I would call this little rise out here the CS or ESS compensation. The difference between a lot of CS DACs and ESS DACs are ESS DACs tend to sound a little more extended, so there's not really much harm in just putting a tiny, 0.5, -1. Oh, ignore that one for a second. I'll talk about that in a second. So 10,000, 15,000, you've got 0.5 and 0.5, so a slight rise. The 8,000 right here, those of you who are kind of sensitive to sibilance, you can actually do kind of a blanket -1. Lots and lots of budget sets tend to put too much energy at 8,000. Why not put that right into your dongle? You have this built-in little sibilance damper, and that's what I would call that one. So all this is actually well and good. You can save your custom EQ, and I called it UnHarman. You can update. You can share this on here as well. You can try it. So this will actually, so as your music is playing here, you can say try, and then you can actually hear the results on your music that is playing. You can apply it. So apply it will actually write it straight to your device. So when you unplug your dongle, you still have this EQ burned into your dongle. So all of this is kind of things that you're probably familiar with and really no different than some of the other dongles that are out there. And this just happens to be a web interface so that you could do it there. So where things get sort of interesting, and like I talked about, so I would say CS chips tend to almost sound like Harman. They have, especially this dongle, it has a very lean kind of bass shelf. It doesn't even have the sub bass boost to it, but it sounds quite lean in the mid bass, and it sounds a little bit vocal forward. And most CS dongles can tend to sound that way for me as well. So what this guy did, Pragmatic Audio, he actually went ahead and integrated in the walkplay interface into Squig. So now not only do we see the numbers that are over here, but now we can see how they affect the Harman target. And over here you see device PEQ, and I've already connected to my TP35 Pro, and then you could pull from device. And then that magically shows you what your PEQ settings look like against a target like the Harman target. So as I said, I like to move the, let's get rid of that. So I like to move the sub bass down a little bit and move some of this energy right into here, and then tilt down the whole upper mid section through 8K and just have it kind of more natural sounding, less kind of over energetic over here in the upper mids and the treble. So now we have a visual representation of essentially these numbers here. Those numbers are actually reflected over here, and this is bidirectional. I tend to not do it in here, but you can actually poke in numbers here and then say push to device, but I was using this interface and saving it and then pulling it over here. So great, right? So now I have a dongle that has a burned in EQ that sort of tames what I don't like about Harman target. So whatever Harman set that I plug into, now I have sort of these settings that will unharmonize for me. And that's kind of where this all started. So if we kind of get rid of, maybe we get rid of that EQ, we'll get rid of that, and we'll actually show you what it looks like on a set like T1C or TinHifi C1, kind of a Harman style set. And this is almost the normal what you would expect on Squig, right? How you do auto EQ, but now it's actually applying the settings that are on my dongle. So this is what C1 would sound like on my dongle. And you can kind of see, I kind of move this Harman style bass shelf into more of a glide that has a mid bass bump, and also tame the upper mids and all the way through kind of up until, somewhere around 8K. The rest of it should be about the same. So, right, perfect. So I get to hear lots and lots of Harman sets. I tend to talk about these same changes to every Harman set because Harman sets don't do the lower mids right. They don't have enough lower body, and they have a little too much over here. So now I have a TP35 Pro automatically set to fix the things that I normally complain about, and that is a cool thing as well. So if we look at, maybe something that is not a Harman target. So Kiwi Ears Astral is another set that I've been listening to, right? So this one isn't quite Harman, but I would call it more of a U shape, right? They got this heavy bass shelf, and then they drop the mids kind of to the floor at 200. And again, this is another one of these styles that I don't necessarily like. I'm kind of more of that meta style. So if we look at what Astral looks like with the same settings, again, now we have a smoother bass shelf. It trades some of the sub bass and kind of moves it into the mid bass. So now we have maybe more of a meta style mid bass, which is kind of tilted up, kicked up a little bit. So now we'll get male vocals sounding a little bit better, a little bit more body to the male vocals in the lower mids, and we kind of tilted down the whole treble range just a little bit. And again, this one, you can kind of go back and you can change these. You can move this, maybe you like a little bit more 3000, maybe you like a little bit more 5K. You can essentially just, save this to UnHarman, do that. You can apply it, you can do that, and then we can go back into here. If we get rid of this, and then we say pull from device. So now instead of a lower version of treble, now we have an upper version of treble. And then as you're playing music, you're actually hearing this change in real time. So very, very cool interface to, connecting what you're seeing in these numbers and PEQ settings that you may have gotten from other people. Now you can see them reflected on the sets that you are interested in or listening to at the time. So kind of a really, really nice end-to-end solution. But, so the last little bit that I will maybe talk about is what do we do? Let's see, let's get rid of that. So let's say we have a set that Pragmatic Audio doesn't have on his list, and so we'll look at the EPZ P50. So those of you who are more familiar with Squig, you'll know that down here you see the P50, you can do some things there, but there's actually a download export graph button here. So we can export that. It'll export it into my downloads folder. We can go over here and say upload frequency response. We have a P50 here. Now we have the P50 on Pragmatic Audio. Now I can go back here as you would do normally, and now we have a treble boosted version of P50. Maybe that's not what I want because I didn't like that change. I was doing that for a different set. So let's do that. Let's do this. Let's go back, and I kind of messed this up a little bit, but we'll move this back to 0.5 or so. We'll move this back down to 1.5. And now we can save this out. Again, try it so you can hear it, you can apply it, and that will burn it. And then we can go back here and pull it. And now we have, again, kind of this better, smoother, glided version of the bass shelf and a lower treble. And this gives you kind of a more richer style version of P50. So very, very cool dongle. So as I said, again, it's essentially the same as the old TP35, just with two important changes. And I think this walk play interface, and again, this great work that Pragmatic Audio did to kind of link it to tools that we're already using was just a really, really great move. And hopefully he continues it, and hopefully I'll figure out a way to send him some money for the great work that he's already done, because it's pretty amazing how it all works. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.